This time I'd like to call to order the Monday, May 18th meeting of the Currituck County Board of Commissioners. We started this morning at 8:30 on the budget and worked through that today, and at 6 o'clock this evening we had a work session on solar farms, solar arrays. And at this time I'd like to call on our dear friend Reverend Glenn McCreaney to lead us in the opening prayer and pledge of allegiance. Please stand.
And let us pray. O God, amid a world of confusing and conflicting issues which we are confronted in our daily lives, we seek answers, we seek clarification, we seek for a period of peace in a time of solitude. We come now in a brief moment of self-reflection and prayer to be surrounded by holy stillness, which brings hope and renewed faith in your creation. In this holy moment in prayer, we include our neighbors, people of our beloved Currituck County, and also our elected leaders. Bestow upon our commissioners tonight the wisdom of Solomon, the patience of Job, and the holy love of Jesus, as they debate, discuss, and deliberate the multitude of issues before them. We pray their first priorities will be for the betterment of our county and the fulfillment of its people's potential. Bless them, guide them, grant them patience. May we, the people, always be aware of the needs of our neighbors in these troubling and stressful times. May our lives be guided by what is best for others, rather than always what is best for us. In these things we pray in your holy name, and all God's people say, Amen. Amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Pastor Glenn. This time I'd like to approve the agenda. I do have one addition to the agenda. Under new business, I'd like to add item A1. The NC Watermen United Board of Directors are here tonight to discuss some proposed changes to by the marine fisheries, and we have Mr. Perry Beasley here to do a short presentation, so I would like to add that to our agenda.
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
Second.
I have a motion for approval, a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, like sign. Motion carries. At this time, we'll move into public comment. I have 3 people signed up tonight. As always, when you come forward, I ask that you please restate your name and your address for the record. And public comment is 3 minutes, and Mr. McCree will work the clock. Green button for 2.5 minutes, yellow button 30 seconds, and red button is 3 minutes. So this time we have Mr. Fred Waterfield.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Ladies and gentlemen of the commissioners, and ladies and gentlemen of the public. I'm Fred Waterfield, president of Non-Solid Royaltons. As you know, the history of Non-Solid Royaltons, some of you already know what we do. And I'm here tonight to ask for your approval of the alcohol on the park, so we can have the park Peach Festival have our beer and wine this year. As you know, the Peach Festival has been going on for a long time, and we raised a lot of money and put it back into the community. This year so far, we've put $9,000 back in the community. 3,300 went to the schools at Not Solid. So, and various other things, all the way down to buying flags for the cemeteries. I mean, we do a lot, and I think a lot of you already know what we do. And we also, we donated the park, and we worked hard to pay for that park. So as the Peach Festival gets older, it's less money being raised, and we feel like this wine and beer being sold on the park would give us the right to create more money for to give to the community. So if you can find it to pass it, we appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Waterfield, For the schools, just you spoke about money that goes to the schools. Just for the public's information, what does that go for?
Well, the elementary school this year is $1,500. That went in the computer program system, and we've also went with First Start kids. We paid for them. I paid for one night. Was going to get kicked out. I paid out of my pocket. And we have got a program going to the kids of Knott's Island School that needy kids, and we buy Christmas toys for them. So we spent $1,050 for that last year for kids, and a lot of the stuff was donated too, so it was more than that. And well, I told you preschool
I think
scholarships. I think we got 3 or 4 of them, and we try to do all we can for the schools.
I know the Ruitons give $2,000 or $3,000 senior scholarships each year, and I think, as he said, the First Start, Knott's Island is one of the communities that don't get funded because of per capita income. Don't get any funding for the Early Start or First Start or whatever.
Yeah.
And the Ruitons have taken that on and tried to make it happen themselves. So they're good for the community and do a lot of good things to help the community. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Bonnie Williams?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, if you can pull it down.
Oh,
Just
okay. Thank
pull
you.
it on down.
Hold on it, Bonnie. Get her back.
Okay.
There you go.
Okay. Hi, my name is Bonnie Williams. I am a Ruiton. I've been a Ruiton since 2007. Excuse me. Just like I'm here too because I'm on the committee for the Peach Festival. And the Peach Festival, we had a problem when we redid the bridge. We didn't have the Peach Festival that year. Then we had a problem when they were paving the road. We didn't have the Peach Festival that year. So it's kind of hard to get it back going. And we used to make quite a bit of money with it. But it has fallen off with the economy and everything. So we feel that, just like Fred said, that if we could do like wine coolers, peach wine coolers there, that it would bring more money to the community. And just like Fred said, we do give a lot to the school because what we're doing with the schools, we're doing the Head Start program since, like you said, the per capita, none of our kids are funded that way. So we give about $500 to the school where these kids from Knott's Island can go and get some early childhood development there. Another thing that we do is we do a Halloween thing, and that costs us about $500 that we give, good snacks to the kids up at the fire station. We fund the Girl Scouts, the Boy Scouts. So there's a lot of things on Knott's Island that we do. We have elderly people that have problems. We go fix their water pump. We redo their porches. So we do need to bring up some more income in on the Peach Festival. Last year, I think we only made about $15,000. And in 2004, we spent $9,000 back into the community. So we do hope that you will let us get a special permit that we can have alcohol at the Peach Festival this year. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. And Ardell Waterfield?
Name's Ardell Waterfield. I live at 101 Seabreeze Drive South, Knott's Island, North Carolina. I'm also on the Peach Festival Committee, and we're here to ask for use of alcohol on the premises by the Ruiton only. We are not looking to lease it out to a vendor. It'd be a Ruiton-controlled function, and we want to make sure that it is handled with law enforcement, ID checks, and not turn it into a drunk fest, to handle it responsibly. And we're just looking for beer and wine coolers. With it, we've also done a lot of Facebook media stuff, asking people what's going to hold them to our festival, because people's coming in, literally walking in, walking out. And this was one of the biggest ideas that people had, that they wanted to see something more adultish for them to be able to come to. and we would appreciate y'all's consideration for allowing this on the park. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. That's everyone I had signed up for public comments. Is there anyone that didn't sign up that wishes to speak? Hearing none, I'm going to close the public comment. Move to our first public hearing. It's PB 1423, Justin Old request to amend the Unified Development Ordinance, Chapter 5, Development Standards, and Chapter 6, Subdivision Infrastructure Standards to modify performance bond requirements for transportation, utility, connectivity to the property boundary, Chapter 5, Development Standards to modify the farmland buffer requirements, Chapter 6, Subdivision and Infrastructure Standards to modify the Homeowners Association transfer and reserve fund requirements in Chapter 5, Development Standards to allow subdivision directional real estate signs. Mr. Woody.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There's basically 4 parts to this text amendment. What I would suggest, if the board is so willing to do this, is perhaps to vote on those one at a time, because that would avoid me having to go through all 4, then you having to come back and vote on the first one, which you may at that point have, been so far removed from, you may not be prepared to ask questions. So would the board accept doing these one at a time?
Yes.
Okay. The first one we have tonight is street connectivity. And this is, again, all these amendments are proposed by Justin Old, and staff's worked with him for several months now. Most of these amendments went to the planning board multiple times, too, so there was a lot of dialogue from the planning board. External street connectivity is an issue we struggle with in Currituck County. You're actually going to see this as part of your subdivision request before you tonight. What we've worked with Mr. Olds on is trying to find a way to ensure that streets are connected between subdivisions. So generally what you see is subdivision A comes forward first, and in the event at that point the owner of subdivision B is not cooperative, you'll see subdivision A build a street to the property line. If there's not a swale, if there's not a ditch, it's real simple. You pave to the property line, and you essentially stop there. And then the next one, when parcel B develops, they make the connection. But what happens typically in Currituck County with our parcels is you see that there's a ditch or a swale. So it's actually not possible to pave to the property line unless the developer of parcel A can get permission or get access to work on parcel B. So what you typically find in our ordinance now is that the connecting street is built and it stops about 10 to 15 feet short of the property line, and at that point it just kind of stays that way, particularly if the owner of parcel B doesn't allow access at that time. So what we're struggling with is the manner in which you make that connection happen. So if the property is that the street connection is built and it stops 15 feet short of the property line, developer B comes in, they will then need to install the culvert, and finish the connection. Of course, the developer B has the same problem. At that point, there's probably a good chance that property A has already been developed out, and that road may in fact be owned by the homeowners association, who may not want to see the connection. So we've got a situation where there's different ownership difficulties. We're not a city, so the county just can't build the street. We have to rely on the developer or the developers of each of the properties. So what we've worked with Mr. Olds to propose. First thing is to make sure that whenever this occurs, that an easement's created on both property, or an easement's created on property A, so that when property owner B goes to develop, we know they'll have access to make that street connection. So first, so that's a common sense addition. It makes sure that legally access exists between the two properties to complete the connection. The other thing that we've talked to Mr. Olds about, and where I guess there's some divergence of opinion on this, is, and it's not a bad way, just something for the board to consider tonight. Mr. Old has requested that when property A developer builds the street within 10 or 15 feet of the property line, that they then post a performance guarantee, so that when property developer B comes in, they can then utilize the money from that performance guarantee to finish the connection. In other words, property owner B is not having to pay for a culvert pipe and 10 foot of asphalt on somebody else's property. What the staff would propose, rather than tracking performance guarantees, is that property owner A provide a payment in lieu. And as the board's aware, we've submitted a local act to the General Assembly this year to allow Currituck County to collect a payment in lieu for street connectivity. So rather than a bond being posted with the city or the county planning department, what would happen then is developer A would post a payment in lieu. So basically, they would provide a cash payment to cover the cost of that future connection. And then when developer B makes that connection, they would then have access to that cash payment to complete the connection. So I think the developer and the county both agree there needs to be some sort of financial mechanism in which to allow these connections to occur. Perhaps the mode in which they happen is different. Again, staff's point is I think a payment is authorized through this local act is a cash deposit. It's something that's reliable versus having to track bonds. But the developer will give, or the applicant will give more information on that. The last thing I want to mention, which the staff actually thought this was a suggestion by Mr. Old, and we think this too is a good idea. In the event that the connection can be made, so let's say there's two adjoining properties and they can be connected, the developer has asked that if that connection is made, that the developer of Tract B not be able to use that connection as their primary entrance and primary construction entrance without permission of the owner of Tract A. So in other words, what that means is if I develop Tract A and I put my connectivity road in, and that then provides access to Tract B, the developer of Tract B would need to get permission to use those internal subdivision streets for their construction equipment, which makes sense because that's a lot of wear and tear on streets that may at that point be owned by an association. So if this connectivity moves forward, that can only be the primary entrance to the new subdivision if permission is granted by the owner of Tract A. Staff actually think that's a good idea and supports that. That concludes my presentation on connectivity. I can answer any questions now or after the applicant presents their information.
Questions of the staff? Hearing none, I guess, Mr. Bissell, you're representing Mr. Old. Mr. Old, maybe you're representing Mr. Bissell?
That's how it usually goes.
We'll try to jointly handle this. I think that Mr. Old basically pretty much agrees with the staff recommendations on this, with the primary concern, though, being about having some flexibility on what kind of a performance guarantee there is, not just limiting it to a cash payment in lieu, but actually allowing the long-term performance guarantee as an option, which helps with the developer's cash flow and so forth. Now, there's an issue we know that goes along with it, that it has to be tracked, but it's much more development friendly. Certainly the county has the ability to track these and has done it for years and years, and we would just ask that you consider allowing that option rather than just strictly a straight cash payment for something that may not be built for 5, 10, or more years.
So, Mr. Bissell, you can get a performance bond for longer than 3 years?
Or a letter of credit. Generally, they would have an annual renewal.
Performance bonds are typically about 2 years, and then they want you to be kind of close to finished.
Well, we've done letters of credit that have gone on for a long period of time. There's just an annual fee for the lender that.
Will you lift that microphone up like I can hear you?
I'm sorry. There's just an annual fee that the lender requires to renew that letter of credit each year.
Is letter of credit acceptable to the staff?
Yes, the letter of credit is an acceptable performance guarantee. Actually, the state statutes require the county to accept bonds, letters of credit, and cash, of course. So.
And I want to ask a question, Mr. Woody. It's not meant to put you in the hot seat or anything, but it keeps coming back that keeping track of it is a problem. I would certainly think in 2015, with the technology that's available now, that keeping track of these instruments would be somewhat easier.
Yeah, I think the idea of tracking it in the sense of annually, can we have a notice pop up on somebody's computer to say, the Hidden Oaks letter credits due for renewal? Yes. What's difficult more is in the event, I'm not saying that these gentlemen would do this, but in the event that the development company is bankrupt or they can't get the letter of credit renewed or they've completed their development and that LLC no longer exists to an extent, it becomes hard to track when you have trouble renewing the letter of credit year after year after year. So perhaps it's more of a not so much a tracking issue, it is compliance issue at times. It's just something that you've got to stay on and make sure it's renewed every year.
Okay. Any other questions? All right.
Real
Yeah.
quick. So, like in this case, what would the estimated cost to complete a subdivision's piece of the connector be?
If you're talking about a
From a-
typical 15 or 20 foot connection that would have a culvert pipe and so forth, you're probably looking at on the order of $100 a foot, I would guess. Is that-
No, it was more than that. Baxter, I think it was around 15 to.
So $15,000 to $20,000. Yeah.
So, and what's the cost typically of the infrastructure construction of a neighborhood of that size? Roads, gutters.
Anywhere from what?
25,000 a lot would be kind of a
Yeah.
typical figure.
25 a lot. So, okay. So typical subdivision, 20 houses or more. It's
500,000.
relatively, it's not
500,000.
that. Got it. Okay.
Any other questions? Hearing none, I'm open to public hearing. I had no one signed up to speak on this issue. Is there anyone that wishes to speak? Seeing none, I'm going to close the public hearing and ask the board for a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move to approve this text amendment or amendment to the UDO. However, I would like to see the payment of the funds in lieu. Yeah. Vice a performance bond or a letter of credit.
All right, we have a motion. Do we have a second?
I'll second it.
Have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. Motion carries. Next item, Mr. Wooding.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This item is simpler, actually, a little more straightforward. In the UDO, the county has a farmland compatibility standard. And what that essentially does, it requires development, new development that's proposed adjacent to active farmland, that it sets aside a 50-foot buffer. In that buffer, half of it remains undisturbed or unvegetated. That's the half closest to the farm. The other half closest to the development is required to have planting or buffering requirements. Obviously, if there's an existing tree line, you could use that as credit. But what we found is in planting, when there's not an existing tree line and it's basically a field beside a field, the buffering is quite frankly, and I'm going to say this, it's probably overly cost burdensome. We had an example of a farmland buffer that was required to go in, and because of the caliper inch of the tree that needs to be planted, it ended up being about $100,000 for tree planting. It was a big farm, it was a big buffer. Staff actually agrees that's somewhat unreasonable. The other thing we've noticed is that in these real kind of barren agricultural areas, when the trees are planted at a minimum 2 caliper inch, which is about an 8 to 10 foot tall tree, they tend not to live. I mean, they really just don't do well at that size. We found that, quite frankly, that some of the developers that plant, and I'm not saying that this is always the case, but sometimes when you plant smaller trees, in 5 years' time, they actually seem to be bigger than some of the bigger trees that are planted. We think that's reasonable in these farmland buffer areas because they're planted, and pretty quickly they get turned over to the HOA for maintenance. So we have worked with Mr. Old to develop a planting rate that allows smaller trees to be planted along the buffer length. Previously, the way the rate was calculated was by taking what's called an aggregate caliper inches. So you need to plant this much inch of tree, which can be spread across 7 or 8, 9 trees every 100 feet. What we've done is just say 14 trees equally distributed for every 100 feet. So you basically just get more of a linear buffer of trees that don't have to be as large. So you get a little more trees planted, but not as large at planting, and along the perimeter of the development proposal. We've also, during the planning board, noted that the buffer may contain up to 50% evergreen species, and of course we excluded pine trees. There was a lot of feedback from the agricultural community that pine trees are problematic adjacent to the agricultural fields. And that concludes this presentation. And staff thinks it's reasonable and does recommend approval of this request. And I should have noted this on the last request, but the planning board also recommends approval as presented.
All right, questions for Mr. Woody? Hearing none, Mr. Bissell, do you and Mr. Old have anything to add to it?
No, we are in sync with the staff recommendation.
Okay, I'll open the public hearing. I had no one signed up. Is there anyone wishes to speak to this issue? Seeing none, I'll close the public hearing and ask the board for a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion for approval with the staff recommendations.
I'll second that, Mr.
A
Chairman.
motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Oppose? Motion carries. Next item, Mr. Woody.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Item 3 is related to homeowners and property association requirements. And this has been something, as the board knows, in the old ordinance, when a developer would bring a subdivision to record, there was a point in time when the infrastructure, that could be the roads, the stormwater ponds, the clubhouse, the open space, whatever it is, was transferred to the homeowners association. In the old ordinance, we really didn't have any mechanism per se to govern how that transfer occurred. And oftentimes what we found is a lot of neighborhoods the association would assume the common areas and the maintenance responsibilities, but not have the financial resources, capability, or even structure to maintain those adequately. And then what you see on the back end a lot of times is subdivisions come before this board asking for relief or assistance with whatever maintenance items may be in need of upgrade. So what the county has done, and we worked again collaboratively with Mr. Old on this, and some other developers, we've also discussed this with them, is we tweaked a couple of parts of the ordinance. So when the new ordinance was adopted, the county required that at the time of transfer, that a reserve fund is established that would be in the name of the HOA. So the HOA would assume the common areas and have some financial resources to maintain those. And additionally, at the time of transfer, the common areas are required to meet the current standards. So as there's a degradation in common areas, at some point when the developer transfers those to the HOA, those degradations or deficiencies need to be corrected, and the county requires a certification to ensure this. So this puts a lot more structure around how this transfer occurs. And so what we're recommending, what we found is the first thing is that the transfer in the ordinance currently is required to occur at 51% of lot sales. We're actually recommending that number be moved up to 75%. Reason for that being is that usually when 51% of the lots are sold, the neighborhood's still fairly new, and we found you generally don't have any functioning HOA yet. It's still too soon for the HOA to be up and functioning. So we feel like that moving that transfer date to 75% of the lot sales allows more people to be in the neighborhood, the development to be closer to completion, but at the same time, from the county's perspective, 25% of the lots still haven't sold and haven't been built on, so there's still incentive or motivation for the developer, obviously, to finish the development. So we feel like the 75% transfer is a point where there's enough people in the neighborhood to manage the association, but there's still enough incentive left, so to speak, for the developer to complete the development. At that transfer, one thing that we've required or added is that in addition, initially a registered engineer has to provide a report to the county saying that the infrastructure meets the standards, so we know the HOA is getting good infrastructure. But additionally, we've added language that says the report shall also include verification of the reserve fund balance in accordance with the standards of this section. So we're starting to get this reserve fund requirement included in some of the reporting information that's conveyed to the county at 75% of lot sales. And the last thing that we worked on with this particular case is the reserve fund itself. Initially, what the county did is we basically said that the balance of the reserve fund has to be equal to 10% of the construction cost of common areas, common features, and private infrastructure. We found that varied wildly from development to development. Sometimes 10%, for example, a small development may not be enough to really do anything. In a large development, it could be an astronomical amount. So we've worked to try to find some balance or find an area where the amount of money in the reserve fund is reasonable in the sense of it gives the association a chance to maintain their property and get off on the right foot, but not overly burdensome in that it's just a lot more money that would be needed for maintenance issues. So what we've done, instead of just being very general, we've outlined a couple of things that the reserve fund is based on, and I want to cover those real quickly. One is that it be based on 10% of the road construction cost for streets not maintained by NCDOT at the time of transfer. So road construction cost is gravel, base, and asphalt. But the key part of that is we're saying that if the time of transfer at 75%, if the developer's been able to transfer a road to NCDOT for maintenance, obviously you don't need to have a reserve fund for the HOA to maintain that road because DOT is already doing that. So it kind of just corrects that in the event you have a developer that's very aggressive in getting the streets turned over. Additionally, it bases the cost of the roads on specific construction components such as gravel, base, and asphalt. Another thing we added is, except for sidewalks and street trees, 10% of the construction costs for common features and private infrastructure. So again, that 10% is specific to a clubhouse, a tennis court, a swimming pool, anything that would be considered common infrastructure or common feature. We didn't include sidewalks in that number. We removed that because principally what we're relying on is that when the sidewalk is added, it's concrete. As long as it's installed correctly, you really have very little maintenance with concrete or sidewalks. So we took that out of the reserve fund calculation. You just kind of assume that sidewalks are going to crack over time, but they're generally a good material and have very low maintenance costs. We weren't sure that needed to be in this reserve fund calculation. The last two things we added, which I think are important, is that the developer must provide liability insurance and taxes for 2 years, so the account's got to have enough money to cover insurance and taxes for 2 years for the association. And additionally, the developer's got to calculate facility, stormwater, and landscaping maintenance costs for 2 years. And again, that's got to be in the reserve fund. So when the HOA assumes this common area, they've got money for construction maintenance of streets. They've got money for maintenance of private facilities, clubhouses, etc. And they've got 2 years of money to cover liability insurance, taxes, and then any kind of stormwater or landscaping maintenance costs. And again, you assume after 2 years, at that point, the HOA's been collecting dues and they're able to kind of figure out their budget and take over from there. So that concludes staff presentation on that. The planning staff does recommend approval of this request as presented. Additionally, the planning board heard this request at their meeting, and they too recommend approval. I want to make sure I capture their recommendation correctly. And the planning board actually spent a lot of time on this, and I would say that I think they influenced a lot of what you see before you tonight in terms of finding a balance between the HOA assumption of maintenance and what the developer is obligated to do. The one thing I'll note that the planning board, spent some time discussing is the idea that if NCDOT has come out and certified or done an analysis of the streets, and you know what needs to be done to bring the streets up to standard or what needs to be done to make them in compliance with the ordinance, the planning board suggested that rather than make the engineer recertify what NCDOT just did, that you accept what NCDOT did, which I think is reasonable. I think staff would do that anyway. So that concludes my presentation, and I can answer any questions you have.
Questions for Mr. Woody?
Yeah, I've got one question, Woody. Back in the beginning, you stated you did speak with other developers on this, and they were in agreement and they were okay with this?
Generally.
Any concerns from them at all?
The one concern that I would say developers still have is I think they would tell you they still don't like leaving. I think they would say there's still probably too much money that's left in an operating reserve fund for an HOA. I think they're very reluctant to want to leave money more than they need to or more than the actual cost is for an HOA to manage maintenance. So I guess the one caution I would say from developers is that they like it, they think it's in the right direction, but they probably would still argue it's maybe more money than it needs to be in the reserve fund.
Any other questions? Hearing none, Mr. Old and Mr. Bissell.
One thing that actually occurred to me as Mr. Woody was making that presentation, we have a project that where we're developing a community water system that will be a private system, and in that particular case, the state has criteria that they have set out where you develop what's called a water system management plan, that is based, and they actually have criteria for setting up a reserve fund based on the cost of the
the pumps and the tanks and the equipment and so forth, rather than just being a straight percentage. So I would propose on that perhaps the language could be amended to say something on the order that of except in the event that it's regulated by the state, in which case the county might defer to the state on that reserve fund computation.
You have an issue with that, Mr. Woody?
I do not. I think if the state has that type of requirement set up, I think the county's fine with that. And there's no reason to be redundant. I would ask Mr. Weatherly if he has any issues with that or no. Okay.
So you would add that as part of any recommendation that the board would make if in fact we approve this?
I would agree to that, yes, sir.
Okay. Any other questions? Hearing none, I'm going to open the public hearing. Or do you have anything else?
Yeah, a little more.
Oh, keep on going. I'm sorry. It's been a long day. I'm trying to keep us moving. I apologize.
I guess the
Take
only
your
other
time.
concern would be is there a way to provide assurance that the funds that are put into the HOA account are actually utilized for their intended purpose?
Doesn't the developer set up the HOA?
But once the developer turns it over and sells, gets past the 75% point, and then there's an operating board that's controlling that. I guess the developer was just concerned that there be some mechanism for assuring that the community is those funds are used to maintain the community up to the standard that it was originally intended.
You have a recommendation on what that mechanism would be?
That reserve fund? I'm definitely insured.
I mean, staff?
I feel like, Mr. Chairman, at that point, it becomes
it's not our problem.
private issue between a nonprofit corporate entity and
The
its
civil
and its
issue,
membership.
if there's an issue.
And of course, there's statutory provisions that require a nonprofit corporation to act in conformity with its bylaws and its articles of incorporation. So I think that those types of things could be addressed at the time that the corporation is created by the developer and put into place, it seems to me.
I think you make a good point.
Okay. He said it better than what I was trying to say the same thing, but he said it better.
I mean, the developer sets up the homeowner association.
Yeah.
I'm going with it.
Yeah, what he said.
He said.
All right, do you have anything else? Y'all have any questions? Open the public hearing. No one signed up. Is there anyone who wishes to speak? Seeing none, I'll close the public hearing and ask the board for a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I'll make a motion to approve the staff recommendation from 51% to 75%, including the operating fund balance and the requirement for the engineer's report to remain in the UDO.
I'll second that.
I have a motion and a second. That's consistent with what you agreed to, Mr. Woody?
Yes, sir.
Any other questions?
I just have one question. I believe Mr. Woody followed up. That's what the DOT requirements, that the standards met with DOT be the primary and not have a redundancy of the developer having to do it over.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yeah.
No further.
Hearing no further questions, we need a vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. And I believe there's one more item, Mr. Woody.
There is one more item, and this is, I guess this is where the staff and the applicant diverge. Perhaps the cooperation ended here.
Okay.
That actually didn't. Mr. Old has been good to work with on this, I'll say, and he's tried hard to make this amendment presentable to the board tonight, so I'll give him credit for that. This is also one this is also one where the planning board too recommended denial of this request. And what this is a request for, and I'm making sure I'm correct about that. This is one where also the planning board did recommend denial, but they did that on a split vote. And And what you have before you tonight by Mr. Old is a request to add additional signage to the ordinance. Right now, there's a handful of items in our ordinance that allow for off-premise signage. And again, as the board knows, off-premise signage is a sign that's located on a different piece of property from that which it advertises, so commonly known as a billboard. There's a couple other exceptions. We've got the directional signs for churches and institutional uses. You saw the other night there's an exception for a off-premise directional sign for some of our businesses located on waterways. And what Mr. Olds is proposing is that the ordinance be amended to allow a temporary directional real estate sign for a new subdivision. And he's proposed to allow this only on the mainland, prohibited on the Outer Banks, limited to a maximum of one sign per subdivision, and the signs may be placed in an intersection accessing the subdivision with the landowner's permission. Sign may not be illuminated and may not be on any property for more than 12 months. Maximum size or square footage is 16 square feet, and maximum height is 8 feet. And what that essentially means, in more or less, if you had a subdivision that was located off the main highway, Mr. Old is proposing this amendment to allow the developer of that subdivision to place one sign at an intersection on the highway that would direct travelers or passerbys or whoever it is back to the subdivision off the highway. Staff has considered this request, and we are recommending denial of it, principally based on the policies in the land use plan that do not support additional off-premise advertising signs. We feel like, staff feels like that this has been an issue for many years in Currituck County, and back in the early to mid-2000s, off-premise signage was prohibited by the county, and the county since that time took a pretty strong position that we won't do things or make ordinance changes to increase or add to that off-premise directional signage. So staff did recommend denial of that. And with that, I can answer any questions you have. Again, the planning board had a split vote on this, and because of the rules of procedure, that moved forward as a denial. And yeah, thank you, and I can answer any questions you have. And that concludes all the text amendments from Mr. Old tonight.
Any questions of Mr. Wooding?
I have one. Ben, what type of signage is allowable to if he is off the road, and I mean, just what is allowed under the current sign ordinance?
What the options, obviously, that Mr. Old would have is first and foremost is to put a sign on the property, on the subdivision property itself, and the second option would be to rent an existing billboard in the county and use that to direct people to the subdivision.
So if his property was a quarter of a mile off of the main road, he would have to use a billboard.
You have to use a billboard, that's correct.
So I was reading through the planning board minutes, and one of the comments was if you have 10 subdivisions down the road, you could potentially have 10 signs at one intersection. I think that's some of the clutter is the issue.
Yeah.
It is, and that's probably a good example. That would be Tulse Creek Road, for example.
All right, Mr. Old and Mr. Bissell.
I feel more confident with you up here, buddy. You look good. No, my main concern obviously is real estate in Currituck. It generates a lot of income for a lot of people, not just myself, but the county as well. And I don't know, but of one subdivision that's actually visible from Highway 168, we have rented billboards. Ben can tell you we currently have billboards now. They don't generate the same amount of traffic into a site that intersection signs do and things of that nature. I mean, it's good if you're selling peanuts, I guess, but for houses, people don't generally look at billboards in this area. It doesn't seem that way, at least. And I agree with the clutter, but I mean, if we're worried about clutter, and I'm all for fresh produce, but I think y'all know where I'm going with this. I mean, I have nothing against the markets, but why are they exempt when real estate, you're not allowed an off-premise sign at all for real estate? I mean, it just seems unfair to me. Maybe because I'm in real estate.
But aren't you allowed to have those
No,
real estate signs?
not one. You're not allowed any off-premise signs. It's got to be on your property. So if you're, like you said, on Tolls Creek Road or Pointers Road or Baxter Lane, anywhere, you can't have any signs on the highway anywhere or anything that's outside of the property lines. And when you're on the property line, they're limited to what you can have. You have to have a building permit to have a sign on the lot. You're allowed one 4x8 sign at the entrance. So if they happen to be going 70 miles an hour and hit a hard left-hand turn and see you a quarter mile off the highway, then yeah, I guess it does work. So, but at least they'll get plenty of peaches.
Anyone have any questions? Hearing none, I'm going to open the public hearing. And again, I have no one signed up to speak. Is there anyone who wishes to speak that did not sign up? Seeing none, I'm going to close the public hearing and ask the board for a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move to deny PB 14-23, which would be Chapter 5 Development Standards to allow subdivision directional real estate signs. Denied due to the inconsistency with sign policies and standards, and it does create an aesthetic problems with the highway corridor.
We have a motion for denial. Do we have a second?
I'll second that.
I have a second. I have any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Is that everything?
That's everything.
Mr. Old, you did 3 out of 4. That's a winning percentage.
It is. I feel good.
Next item, and the gentleman from the Waterman, you're right after this next item. This one probably won't take as long as the first one, but I know y'all came from out of town. PB 1502 Hidden Oaks request for a preliminary plat use permit for a 67-lot residential subdivision located in Moyock at the terminus of Investors Drive on the east side of Currituck Highway, tax map 9, parcels 26A and 26B, Moyock Township. This is a special use permit. If there's anyone here that wishes to speak in favor of or opposition, please come forward now and be sworn. Place your left hand on the Bible, raise your right hand. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you. Mr. Woody.
Excuse me, Mr. Chairman. I need to make the board aware of, at one point in time, I was a consulting arborist, which is by definition kind of a tree expert, and showed great interest in this project and actually met with Mr. Bissell on the property to look at the trees and what their concept were on preserving those trees during the development. So I believe I can certainly vote with an impartial opinion on this based upon the facts of the case, but feel the need to make sure that that's revealed.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I too need to reveal that Mr. Bissell and I have had conversation prior to the application being submitted, but I can make an impartial decision.
Thank you. Anyone else? All right, Mr. Woody.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a subdivision request. The board has previously seen this as a conditional zoning. Last year, the board did approve the conditional zoning. It allows for 67 residential lots on this tract of land. The size of the site is 37 acres, so that comes out to a project overall density of about 1.81 units per acre, so a little under 2 units per acre. It has a minimum lot size, which most of the lots are slightly larger than this, but the minimum lot size is 10,000 square feet. It is proposed to be connected to the county water system as well as the county wastewater system. Moyock Small Area Plan and the 2006 Land Use Plan both classify this site as full service. Again, you can see the zoning district there. Principally surrounding the property, you have general business zoning to the west and the south. To the east, you have single-family mainland zoning. And again, to the north, you have agricultural zoning. That's a agricultural tract of land that's not been developed. And, of course, to the north, just to the northeast, you can see the Baxter Estates subdivision, which is a relatively new subdivision that was approved a couple of years ago. This is actually a pretty straightforward subdivision request. It really matches the conditional zoning that was submitted to the board last year. There's some some deviation in the street layout, nothing significant. Most of any deviation that was done was to actually avoid trees on the site. This is a very heavily wooded site. They did a pretty good job of trying to cut in the roadbed where there's some existing travelway through the site. Tried to lay out the properties and the streets in a way to avoid removing a lot of trees from the site, and the idea being that hopefully with the tree perimeter or the perimeter of the site is wooded area, you really wouldn't see this very well from other properties. As part of this, real quickly, the applicant was required to do a payment in lieu of parkland dedication. The payment amount of the payment in lieu is $24,000. That fee is used for future recreation improvements in the Moyock area. This is a use permit requirement with the subdivision. Staff's provided suggested findings outlined in your staff report. I can answer any questions you have on those if you do have any. By approving this preliminary plat, this subdivision is then incorporated into our adequate public facilities, our school counts. It adds 16 elementary students, 5 middle school students, and 9 high school students. The county does have capacity to provide seats for that number of students. There's not an adequate public facilities ordinance. TRC reviewed this request. The TRC does recommend conditional approval. I don't want to get into one of the main conditions or one of the main points you have to work through tonight as a board, but generally the conditions of approval are some basic plan corrections, so nothing substantial other than a question about connectivity I want to go through. Planning board also heard this request, and they recommended unanimous approval as well. So what I want to do is take a few minutes is to kind of walk you through the access to the site, and that's kind of where the discussion needs to go tonight. Initially, when the board saw this rezoning, the access was proposed to Currituck Highway. The road right now is called Inventors Drive. It's just north of the assisted living. There's a kind of a propane or gas oil type company there on the highway. But one of the things is the access from the highway would have to cross over the railroad tracks, which one is, there can be some difficulty in terms of, as this board knows, permitting and getting the insurance and all that stuff squared away. Additionally, I think the developer probably wasn't overly interested in having their access to the subdivision go beside that kind of industrial-looking development that's right there on the highway. So what they've done is they've come back and they've proposed 2 options for connecting this subdivision or accessing it from the eastern side of the property. So if you remember, if you go back to this map and you can see the cross-hatched and highlighted area is the subject property. The east side of the property is where you can make a connection from Arrowhead Lane down to Moyock Landing Drive. Moyock Landing Drive being the road that accesses Shingle Landing. The importance of that connection is these subdivisions come together and these connections are made, you may eventually have a point where you can get from Baxter Lane all the way down to Tolls Creek without getting out on the highway. So these connections are starting to form and give the citizens the ability to move north and south and get access to the highway at stoplights rather than stop signs. And, of course, that type of connectivity is supported in the land use plan and in the small area plan. Option A, what makes this a little tricky is the piece of property where the road would be built is owned by Currituck County. That was land that was dedicated to Currituck County as part of the Shingle Landing subdivision. It was dedicated as open space. And so ultimately you, the Board of Commissioners, have to make the decision of whether or not you'll allow for any type of connectivity through the county property. Additionally, if land is removed from the county property to be used for a right-of-way, of course that land has to be replaced, number one, to make the land swap even for the county, but number two, to make sure that Shingle Landing's open space remains whole. Because Shingle Landing subdivision is at their maximum, or I should say minimum amount of open space, so they've got to be made whole. So the developers provided 2 options for how this can occur, and I'm going to give you a condition you may want to consider if you decide to approve either of these options. Option A would be making a connection from the proposed subdivision north to the Arrowhead Lane road. That Arrowhead Lane road goes out to Baxter Road. That's Baxter Estates, which is a subdivision that the developer has access to or is part of the development group for. So I'm going to assume that they're going to give permission to have their primary access come through another subdivision, because this goes back to one of the text amendments we just adopted. But if that were to occur, that would create 0.36 acres of right-of-way that needed to be put through the county's property, and in return, if you look on the lower corner of the subject property, it's in dark green. It's on what would be the southeast corner. They're proposing to dedicate an equivalent 0.36 acres of land on the other side of the right-of-way to the county, and of course to meet the single landing open space requirements. So that's option A. It's just a short connection to Arrowhead Lane.
Does it boundary?
What's that again?
Does it boundary? I mean,
it does. It's adjoining. The right of way would be
Oh,
adjoining
yeah.
to the proposed subdivision, so it would be on the far western margin of the county's open space property. Option B is a more robust connection, and this is the one that would actually achieve the connectivity I mentioned earlier of getting people to move north and south. This is actually running the right of way from Arrowhead Lane all the way southward to Moyock Landing Drive. And that makes the full connection. That requires 1.15 acres of open space. So again, you'd have to create, 1.15, or is it 1.26, Mark? Okay, I think it's 1.15, but whatever it is, whatever the number is of the right of way, I've got two numbers in my packet. It's got to be the same. It's got to survey out. So 1.15 acres of right of way is created. Then the developer has to dedicate a matching corresponding amount, 1.15 acres of open space to the county. Again, if you look at the map, you can see the dark green square on the south east corner of the subject property. That would then be dedicated to the county. So again, it's an equivalent swap, and I believe also that is enough open space that it requires a slight lot size reduction across the property to make that work. No lot sizes go below 10,000 square feet, which is what's the minimum required in the zoning approval. So it doesn't create an issue. It's just something the board needs to know, that to make that whole, it's slightly, and I mean like a 0.36 of an acre per lot size impacts that. So that's a larger land swap, but that would be what is needed to make that full connection. So, as the board considers this, you have several options in terms of the connectivity. Option A and would get the connectivity out of this subdivision and north to Baxter Lane. Option B would get connectivity out of this subdivision north to Baxter Lane and down to Moyock Landing Drive. What staff's proposing tonight, should you move forward with either one of these options, is that the board add the following condition to the preliminary plat approval. Quote, applicant must have the legal ability for ingress and egress to subdivision from Arrowhead Lane and Moyock Landing Drive. What that does is a condition of approval. It means that in order for them to build that road or to build this subdivision, they have to have the legal ability to build that road. In order to do that, they would have to come back to the Board of Commissioners and bring deeds of trust, and a right-of-way and a plan and a survey instrument to make this happen. So if the board approved either one of these connections tonight, this has to come back to get that approval of the land swap and the right-of-way creation for them to move forward with the subdivision. Just to be clear, if it came back and at that time the board did not approve the right-of-way creation of the land swap, they would not be able to meet that condition of approval.
And they would have to go back out to the highway.
They would, that's right. They'd have to amend their subdivision approval as well to do that. The other thing, the consideration that the board should make, and this further complicates it, but it's something I just want to put on the record. Moyock Landing Drive right now is still, it's the entrance to Single Landing Road, and it's still a private right-of-way. What that means, it's dedicated for public use, but it's still owned by the developer at this point. DOT's in the process of accepting Moyock Landing Drive for maintenance, but as the board knows, they've still got to resolve the railroad issues. So if the connection's made to Moyock Landing Drive at this point, and there's no legal reason it can't be made, I just want to say that then this subdivision would have access to Moyock Landing Drive, which of course to this point isn't an NCDOT maintained street. So the board has the option on that of either making the connection, or, and this is a suggestion by the applicant, is that the roadway connection terminate at Moyock Landing Drive right-of-way, so say 10 feet short of it, and similar to an earlier discussion, is that the developer post a performance guarantee, and at such time as Moyock Landing Drive is accepted by the state for maintenance, that last little 10 foot of connection will be made, and what that does is that means that any of this traffic that's generated by this new subdivision wouldn't technically be able to drive on Moyock Landing Drive until it's assumed for maintenance by NCDOT. So if you move forward with Connection B, you also may want to consider a condition. Either you make the connection happen at Moyock Landing Drive, or you require a performance guarantee, have most of the road built, and have that final piece of connection done once NCDOT assumes maintenance of Moyock Landing Drive. So hopefully that makes sense. That's a lot of information. I know the applicant's got information they want to present as well. I think they have a PowerPoint show, actually. I can answer any questions you have now, or I can answer questions after the applicant's presentation.
First question I have is, what is your preferred option as the county planner?
My preferred option as a county planner is option B, because I think long-term for Moyock, having north-south connectivity is critical.
B1 or B2?
B1 with the conditions.
B2 is the one you stop 10 foot short, and
I think it's cleaner to make the connection outright.
B1.
B1.
Okay.
One question, if I go back 2 years, I think it was when Shingle Landing was in here, wasn't the idea having an alternative route to get out of that subdivision something they were looking at or something they wanted?
It is. I won't say everybody in Shingle Landing, but there was a portion of the subdivision that were actually at that point supporting the connectivity through the G's Group subdivision that would get them south out to Shingle Landing Road.
I just remember some conversation, well, quite a bit actually, about the desirability, or let's say the only ingress and egress was across that railroad track, so they were lamenting not having another way to get out of there. Would this not answer some of that?
It would give them an alternate exit from that subdivision. That's correct.
Thank you.
All right. Any other questions?
I've got one. Mr. Woody, with the interconnectivity between the three developments, would that give an opportunity to NCDOT for any type of light consideration at one of these, either Baxter Lane, Moyock Landing?
I don't think that would warrant enough trips to have a light at either of those yet. I mean, I think DOT. I just don't think it's not large enough. It's not dense enough. It would require probably to get a light at Baxter Lane. I think would require more development that access that intersection.
But the opportunity for the interconnectivity to the opposite side of Moyock Landing Drive would,
it helps
in future, would
it
definitely give it an opportunity.
It adds to the count. That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir.
And just one other, I believe the clarification from this earlier action that we took, the creation of this alternate, this B1, if you will, with the connectivity to Shingle Landing, that would carry the invocation that we passed tonight, that it not be utilized as the primary for construction equipment in and out of there.
Yes, that's correct. We could. You're right. If you build the full B1, they would not be able to use Moyock Landing Drive for construction equipment unless they had permission from the owner of that right-of-way, which is still the developer.
And I'm just trying to think of the unintended consequences, and that might be one of the issues that their neighbors want.
Anyone else? Yes, sir.
Mr. Woody, I understand interconnectivity and right-of-ways and everything. Now, the lot size of this neighborhood versus adjoining neighborhoods, you've got 3 adjoining neighborhoods, and we're talking about the small area plan and some of the other things. What are the lot sizes for those 3 adjoining neighborhoods, where this one's less than a quarter of an acre per lot?
Yeah, the lot size for Shingle Landing, which is south and southeast, is probably about 30,000 square feet. And I believe the lot size for Baxter Estates is 40,000 square feet. It's 40,000 square feet, which Baxter Estates is northeast of this.
Okay. Thank you.
Anyone else? Hearing none, Mr. Bissell, Mr. Old.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We do have a PowerPoint presentation. Some of the slides are repetitive from the conditional zoning, but for the benefit of the new commissioners, we'll show those. Some of them are new, but we'll go through them kind of briefly just to kind of review
what we did at the conditional zoning stage. Just to give you first an overview of the site, it does have it is actually, this is one of the more open areas of the site where you see it has kind of a park-like appearance where these trees have been saved. As you get farther into the site, you have denser trees, and as you get to the perimeter of the site, you have a dense wooded buffer. And here's another view, and one of the objectives that we've had is to save as much of this tree buffer as we can through the design of this development. So we have the wooded site, a park-like setting that we're going to try to enhance. Mr. Woody already talked about the adjacent properties where we have the assisted living, we have open space, and we have undeveloped commercially zoned land on the south. We have existing wooded buffers that we're going to maintain. Just to show the context of this, and this also shows the tree survey. We had agreed at the zoning stage to do a tree survey, and the larger trees on there are what you would be classified as heritage trees under the UDO, but we actually located all trees that were 12 inches in diameter and over on the site. So we spent a good couple of weeks out there locating those trees and surveying them in and putting them on the plan, and then kind of just making adjustments to lot lines and roadway alignments to try to preserve those as much as we possibly could. There are some distances on there that show the distances to the neighboring subdivision, Shingle Landing. I think the nearest lot is 550 feet away. That's the undeveloped lot. The nearest current developed lot is about 600 and I can't read the slide from here, 670 feet. The nearest house-to-house dimension to the Baxter Estate subdivision to the north would be about 350 feet, I think it is. So just to put that into context, this is kind of adhering to the buffers that the county commissioners at one time had looked at for those transitional buffers, and I think this thing actually would comply. We had we really do want to create a model conservation community. We want to kind of nestle those homes within these wooded areas. Some of the amenities that we'll be providing are streets with curb and gutter, sidewalks on both sides of the street. We're constructing 2 lakes, and we're maintaining large woodland areas. There was a little discussion about lot size, and I want to kind of show you the typical lots in this development. The lots actually range typically from 10 to 13 or 13,500 square feet, but we have buffers as much as 150 feet in the backs of these lots. So the effective lot sizes are much larger than the stated lot sizes, where when you include those buffers, you have effective lot sizes of 18 to 23,000 and a little more in some cases. So while the lots are smaller, the density is not greater. We have more open space. We did agree at the rezoning stage to reduce the original density proposal by 10% as a show of good faith, and with that density reduction, we increased the open space areas. There were 6 conditions of rezoning, all of which we have met. The use is a conservation subdivision, a maximum of 67 lots, a minimum lot size of 10,000 feet, protecting and preserving existing trees to the greatest degree practicable. We think we've done a really outstanding job of that. Buffers exceeding county requirements, And then railroad crossing disclosure, and really the only disclosure we need to make on the railroad crossing is that it will be used as a construction entrance and emergency vehicle emergency ingress and egress. So that's an improvement that we have made since the conditional zoning. And the other improvement we're offering is to provide that connectivity that Mr. Woody was discussing. This would be a typical streetscape. This is the kind of appearance that we are going to try to achieve. This is a typical house that you will see. Even though the lots are somewhat smaller than some of the adjacent subdivision lots, the homes will not be. They will have equivalent values, and so the values of the neighborhood will be maintained. The builder of this project did build 30% of the homes in Shingle Landing, and has built 100% of the homes in Baxter's Estate, so there will be similar quality and value. This is just showing the overall subdivision plan as presented. And this is showing some close-ups, just a couple of areas here to show what we did to try to preserve those trees. You can see we put some reverse curves in the center lines, and skewed the roads a little bit. We've got islands in the cul-de-sacs where trees can be preserved. You can see right here on the, oops. There's we're going to kind of meander the sidewalk a little bit to preserve the tree. On this one, you can see that we have a wastewater lift station in an open space area that's free of trees, and you can see how we've kind of meandered the drainage swale behind the lots and among the trees to preserve them. And again, preserved a tree in the cul-de-sac and along the edges of the roadways. These are the two options that Mr. Woody talked about of the connectivity. And we're just showing them side by side here, where you have the short connection from Arrowhead Drive that meets the legal requirement and the practical requirement for access to the subdivision. But if the board prefers the full connectivity road to Moyock Landing Drive, the developer has offered to construct that full road at his expense. The reason that we had proposed alternate B2, I guess is what you're calling it, leaving the road 15 feet short, is that we just didn't want there to be concerns with other people using those roads and concern about maintaining those roads prior to DOT taking over that maintenance. And so that's why we had offered to leave it 15 feet short and bond that connection. But so in summary, this community will be well buffered. You've seen the trees, the buffers, and we're going to maintain those buffers and leave them anywhere from 50 to 150 feet to camouflage it from adjacent development and create a little, this own little community kind of nestled in that woods. And one of the advantages of having the smaller lots and the bigger open spaces is the community association will maintain those buffers, so you won't have individual lot owners cutting down the trees. There'll be a covenant that will require them to be preserved and maintained, and the association will take responsibility for that. As Mr. Woody indicated, the project is consistent with the land use plan and the Moyock small area plan. We've identified several reasons that it is consistent in the application. I won't go through those right now. I think they're in your packet. and the staff had provided a couple of additional reasons in the case analysis. As I stated earlier, this proposal does meet or exceed all of the agreed zoning conditions. The plan is consistent and actually improved from the original proposal, and I'd be glad to answer any questions.
Any questions for Mr. Bissell?
I got one more quick, just regarding the homes. Did you state earlier that the average homes are going to be 13,000 square feet? No, I thought it said the home sizes. I thought I heard you say.
No, I was talking about lot sizes.
I thought you said 13,000. Oh, okay, okay, I misunderstood. And I apologize. 'Cause I was going to say that's. I misheard you. That was a big house. Yes, it was.
And a lot.
20 bedrooms.
Who's next?
Yes, Mr. Bissell, the roadway width. What is the roadway width for the roads?
I believe the width is 26 feet from back of curb to back of curb.
Okay. The other question is, and I use some neighborhoods that we already have, I noticed from one of your pictures that it appeared the houses were closer to the road, which means you could put 2 cars in the driveway easily, but if you wanted to put a third car or back the car up, whatever it is going to block the sidewalk, which now makes somebody who's trying to use your sidewalk unable to. Is that picture consistent with what you're telling me?
Well, first of all, the houses are going to have garages.
Right.
And so at least one car will go in the garage, and then we'll provide space for 2 additional cars in the driveway. And we'll provide space in between the sidewalk and the house for that parking, so you're not blocking the sidewalk.
Right.
Quick question. You referred to the current access to the property as being an emergency or just in case type access. Is the intent to put any kind of a physical barricade so that it doesn't become a normal way to get out without having to go all the way around?
We had talked about the possibility of putting a kind of a breakaway barrier there that the fire department would be able to run through, or somebody who had to get out could remove if there was a reason that it had to be used that way. But yes.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Bissell, it's 26 feet. Is that the standard DOT roadway width?
I believe it is.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
Mr. Old, have you discussed the interconnectivity with the adjacent developer?
Which adjacent developer?
Mayock Landing.
No, have not.
Okay. Do you think that's going to be an issue as far as connecting to the Mayock Landing?
I don't foresee it being an issue. If it is, then, that's why we've proposed the B2, I guess it's called now.
Coming across the county property, Mr. Woody, can we move the property line of our property to help with this project, or so that, if there's not an opportunity switch land for land, moving that property line any to give them that right away?
The plan will be for the County Board of Commissioners to consider an exchange of property of equal area and value.
Okay.
In order to give this developer that right of way. As you know, counties cannot construct and maintain roads in North Carolina.
Right. Okay. That answers what the questions I have.
Anyone else?
So the way we understand it, there would be a straight trade of land area for land area, and the land that we have offered is contiguous to existing open space on 2 sides.
Anyone else? All right.
I just wanted to mention one thing here, that there was a land use plan policy consistency statement that I thought was really quite good, and I wanted to repeat that, which is to encourage and foster development that's compatible with the rural atmosphere transitional areas and a small town Main Street feel consistent with the vision policies and future land use map of the Moyock Small Area Plan. And we think that is really what we're trying to achieve here and will achieve, that small town Main Street feel. So,
All right, anyone else? With that, I'm going to open the public hearing, but you two gentlemen were the only one that signed up. So now I'm going to close the public hearing and ask the board for a motion. I do want to ask one question. Mr. McCree and County Manager, are you consistent with staff's recommendation that plan option B would be your preference, and you're okay with that? Or do you have any objections to it?
B1 would be my option, yes, sir.
Okay.
I would agree.
And you have no objections
No.
to that? Okay. We need a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion to approve PB 1502 Hidden Oaks, not Hidden Acres. That's the correct title, Mr. Woody, correct?
Hidden Oaks, that's correct.
Because it will not endanger the public health and safety, it will not injure the value of the adjoining or abutting lands, is consistent or is in conformity with the land use and small area plan, and will exceed the county's ability to provide adequate facilities.
Have a motion. It will not exceed the
Will
county's.
not exceed.
Yes. Have a motion for approval.
Which did you specify? Which?
To include the B1 option for interconnectivity to both the
Arrowhead
Arrowhead and Shingle and Moyock Landing Drive.
And the condition that the applicant must have the legal ability for ingress and egress to subdivision from Arrowhead Lane and Moyock Landing Drive.
I'd like to include that in my motion, yes.
Do we have a second?
I second the motion.
Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor, aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
Motion carries. Under new business, item A1, North Carolina Watermen United. We have Mr. Perry Beasley, and he has brought some of his board with him, and they're going to do a short presentation. And I believe we have a resolution on the agenda tonight to approve the item that they're bringing forward. So, Mr. Beasley, if you'd come forward and state your name and address and who you represent for the board, and the microphone is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Currituck County, and all you commissioners. My name is Perry Wood Beasley Sr. I'm an old school Curritucker. I went to school here. I moved away, lived in Turrell County, owned a farm, and I fish in all the surrounding sounds. And I'm here tonight to gain y'all's support. We've been to other county commissioners, Paquimans, Pasquotank, Carteret. We're going to Turrell County tomorrow. Dare County supporting us. We want y'all's support. We're fighting against the southern flounder issue. First, I want to bring you up on North Carolina Watermen United and just exactly who we are. I am on the board of directors. I'm going to give you a little rundown. NCWU represents the needs of our coastal communities by protecting the livelihood of commercial fishermen, charter boat, head boat operators, and recreational fishermen. We represent your granddad, the grandma, all the way down to a 10-year-old kid. We want everybody to fish with a hook and line. We fish with gill nets. We want to keep fishing. The good Lord put the fish there, and it's there for us to catch, and the people trying to stop us. I'm going to introduce Andrew Berry in a minute. He's got some facts for you and some papers for all of you to see. But we provide all fishermen a voice for fair regulations. We promote recommendations, insights, and ensure the rights of watermen, protect the viability of fishing industry in North Carolina. We encourage an understanding throughout the state about the problems, concerns, harvesting fish, local seafood in North Carolina. The biggest problem we have today, people do not understand, is imported seafood. You do not know what you're eating. It is not properly inspected. It's less than 5% inspected. It's farm raised and stuff we don't even want to talk about. But it's not healthy, and we want to promote North Carolina fresh local seafood. Providing state and federal level for North Carolina watermen ensure that fairly represented and their voices are heard, and that's why we're here tonight. Be vigilant in the changes and affect watermen and the health of fishing resources and the political climate and the economical climate, and address new emerging issues. And of course, that's why we're here tonight. There again, Mr. Mike Blanton has been to several counties, and we've got their okay to support us, and we hope y'all will. A letter of resolution sent to the MFC, and we all remember Brother late Paul Rose. He served as the chairman, and he's gone, and a man took his place named Mr. Sammy Corbett. The problem we have with this is it's a group of people with basically one fisherman, commercial fisherman on that group in the MFC. They say it's 2 or 3, but it's really one. And what happens is it's like fighting a losing battle. It's hard to explain, but it's like all of us being all commercial fishermen going to Duke Hospital and saying there's 11 of us and we're going to tell Duke Hospital how to run their hospital. And there's one doctor and he says it's not going to work. Well, that's basically what we're fighting. And we're one of the biggest groups, and I do not get paid to do what I do. I take days off from work to go to these meetings. I've been to the legislature. I've spoke at the House, talked to the governor. We've had several different occasions. We've talked to higher ups, and they do what we can. But we're fighting this. It's a tough road to hoe. But we're asking y'all's support tonight. And I'm going to introduce Andrew Berry. And there again, NCW is, if any of you are familiar with the Wicked Tuna Show, our president is Captain Britton Shackelford. He runs the Dog House. He's on the Wicked Tuna Show. And the winner of last year, the North versus the South, was the Fishing Frenzy, Captain Greg Mayer, and he's on our board. So we've got some fine people. And there again, we represent the people who shrimp. We represent mom and pops, the little kids, and we represent every one of you. I want you to go catch a fish. But what they're trying to do to us is this. They want us to have a 70-day season, 18-inch flounder, and this is totally wrong. That's for the person with a hook and line. When's the last time you caught an 18-inch flounder on a bottom rig? It's been a long time. And there's plenty of fish out there, and what we want to do is what we do, keep it status quo. They call it a new supplement plan. We want to keep the status quo, which is the amendment plan. 365 days a year we fish and catch a 14-inch flounder. And that's what we're trying to do. But I thank you for having me. And at this time, I'm going to introduce Andrew Berry. And thank you all for your support. And if you got any questions, we'll be glad to answer.
Barry, do you have a card with you?
A card?
You have a business card with you?
Yes, sir.
Let me have one.
First of all, I'd like to thank each and every one of y'all for allowing us to come here and speak. This is something that's very, very important, not just to the fishermen, but also the businesses. You have restaurants, retail markets, tourism. So it's not just actually the people that's out there fishing. So you do have other businesses that are affected by these regulations that they're trying to put on the southern flounder. And I've pretty much got a ton of data as far as numbers and everything, and I've got a copy for each one of y'all, and y'all can pass them
Mr. Woody, and he'll pass them around.
And basically what they're trying to say is that the southern flounder is overfished, a depleted stock, but the thing is, the North Carolina Division of Marine Fisheries, when they do these landing reports, it leaves a trail. Leaves a trail of the landings that you can go back on for, I've looked far back as 1973 on landings on different fish. And when the landings don't add up to what they're saying, that kind of takes away of the depletion. Not going to go over all these numbers, just a few of them that stand out. You can see in 2011, it says there was 1.2 million pounds of southern flounder caught by commercial fishermen. That was in the entire state in 2011. 2 years later, in 2013, there was 1.3 million pounds landed in just Dare County, one county alone. So that's really a big increase. And then they had a 10-year average landing that went from 2004 to 2013. That was just over 2 million pounds. And at that time, half of that 10-year period, we could fish flounder nets 365 days a year. Now, at least 75% of our fishing privileges have been taken away due to closures of areas, not being able to fish certain types of nets like we've always fished. So, by the restrictions of less fishing and these numbers remaining the same, it's actually showing an increase in the flounder instead of a decrease. And like I said, there's just many businesses that are affected or would be affected by this. If they went to, which they have several different proposals they're talking about. One, they're talking about the 18-inch size limit, 70-day season. That would be devastating to the commercial fishermen, recreational fishermen, restaurants. Flounder, southern flounder, is the #1 fish in any restaurant you go to on the coast of North Carolina. If they go to an 18-inch limit, that's going to be gone. You're not going to have that fish just because most of our flounders don't average that size. I mean, most of our flounders are, 16-inch size, probably your average flounder. It would also make it where, say a family comes here for vacation, they wouldn't be able to go out on a dock, catch a fish, catch flounder. They wouldn't be able to go out there and catch 3 or 4 flounders and bring them in and clean them to eat because they wouldn't be big enough. But the thing is, when you look back at all these numbers, when you go by what they have actually recorded, there is no depletion of the flounders. Basically, you have to look at the facts. And that's one thing the Division of Marine Fisheries is completely ignoring is the facts, and it's their facts. It's their numbers. So, anyway, I'd like to thank each and every one of y'all for letting us speak.
What would you say the minimum size is they're trying to go to even up here in Currituck?
Be 18 inches.
18 inches.
Yes, and you're talking about close to a 4-pound flounder. That's
the big flounder.
That's big. I've gill netted all my life. I've gill netted for 30 years, recreational fish as well, and you do catch 18-inch flounders now and then, but for the most part, just on an average, let's just say I go catch 100 pounds of flounders, I might catch 2 or 3 that's 18 inches long. So that's the kind of impact we're talking about that it would do to this. So,
well, I can tell you, I've got a couple of flounder nets. I haven't fished them the last few years, but I can tell you by the time the crabs get done eating the tails off of them, you're lucky to have a 14-inch flounder as it is now. But what has happened is the appointees, I think there's supposed to be 3 commercial fishermen, 3 recreation fishermen, Dr. Daniels, and then 3 at large. Is that correct?
1 scientist, 2 at large.
One scientist and 2 at large. But the little research I've done over the last week since Mr. Beasley contacted me is I found out exactly what you said, that the at-large members and commercial fishermen members don't really do a whole lot to, I don't want to say they don't represent the commercial fishermen. I'm going to be careful what I'm saying. I'll just say that you guys don't have a voice that is standing there united with your position, and the recreational side is getting huge amounts of money from like Cabela's, Redhead, and these different companies are spending huge amounts of money on the recreation side, and the poor guys like these that get up, go to work in the morning, fish, crab, whatever they do, and they don't have the resources to fight these rules and regulations that are coming down. And what they're trying to do. My understanding is they're trying to go around the process where it would be open to the public and it would go through the normal process, and they want to bypass that and just implement the rules. Is that correct?
Pretty much, yes.
And what you're asking for is not only not to do that, but to put it back in the regular process so that there is input.
Correct, yes.
And I spoke with Senator Cook's office, and they're very aware of this issue, and were very supportive. My conversations of your calls, and highly recommend, or didn't recommend, just said they'd be highly receptive of all the endorsements and resolutions and letters that they could get. However, I believe you're against the timeline of Wednesday. So whatever, if we do something tonight to support your position, it has got to go out of here by email tomorrow.
Yeah.
I've got that email address I need to give to someone.
You need to give it to Miss Walton. Yeah.
Mr. O'Neill, just
yes, sir.
Just the same group about a year ago it passed something. You can't even set a little recreational wade net along the ocean, along the beach anymore.
That's correct.
And I had Mr. McLeese. He knows Mr. Daniels, and had him get in touch and look into that just a little bit as a favor, and didn't get anywhere. But seriously, something I've done all my life. Wading net along the beach, can't even do that no more.
This is something I'd like to add. Like we were talking about, how the commercial fishermen on that commission are really not represented. Thinking about it a lot, I guess the best way to compare what goes on with the commission and how the commercial fishermen are represented there, in a comparison, be the same thing if somebody was charged with a crime and goes for a jury, and 3/4 of the people on the jury are openly against what this man's been charged with. You don't have a chance.
Well, I do believe it was maybe 2 years ago there was a proposal to not allow you to catch any sea trout. Was it gray trout?
The 983 bill, we went and spoke at the legislature.
And it wouldn't allow you to catch any rockfish. And what was the other fish?
Drum. Red drum.
And I can tell you, they did a heavy lobbying job to try to get that passed. And I remember this board sent a resolution in opposition to that as well. And a lot of the representatives aren't educated about the commercial fishing, because a lot of them have never lived in the neighborhood where people commercial fish and know how it works and how important it is.
And something else that's kind of been going on, well, this is how the commission is run. And Dr. Daniel, he's the director, but it's pretty much what he says. I've been in contact with Mr. Senator Cook about the proclamation process. The Division of Marine Fisheries does have an emergency situation where they can just issue a proclamation. That's an enforceable law. That was put in place because of, say, an oil spill, bacteria in the water. But for years now, the entire fishing industry is run by strictly proclamation. It doesn't go through Congress. It doesn't go through the process. It pops out, and I actually counted in 2014, there was 192 proclamations in 2014. And my question for Dr. Daniel, when I get a chance to ask him, I want to know how many out of that 192 actually went through the process it's supposed to go through.
That'd be the equivalent of having to check and see what the new traffic laws of the day are. Literally, am I right?
Right.
They literally can change the law on a daily basis, and go ahead, predict a business model on that.
Well, anybody have any other questions?
I do.
You do?
I like to speak.
Yes, sir.
Thank y'all for your time.
Well, let me come on, Mr. Waterfield.
All right. As some of you know, for 12 years I served on Northeastern Advisory Board for the state of North Carolina Marine Fisheries.
I don't see a marine fishery officer in here tonight to back up what they're saying. Start with summer flounder is on a quota basis, and so is your rockfish.
North Carolina.
You get a quota every year. If you catch over that quota, your size limit goes up to pay it back. I haven't heard how far y'all are over the quota.
We're not over the quota. We're not over the quota. Can I get back over and speak?
Yeah, don't say one thing. Like I said, I served on this board for 12 years, and I was on the Flounder Commission. I was on the Rockfish Commission, and in order for the size limit to go up, the federal government does that. You pay it back by the size limit. New Jersey, when I got off the board, paid it back with 21-inch fish. So North Carolina must be way over their quota. They go from 14 commercial and 15 recreational to 18. Somebody's way over quarter somewhere. I'm not against these people, but you're dealing with the federal government when you go to summer flounder and rockfish, and besides, there's two different kinds of species of flounders in North Carolina. Summer flounder is one of them.
Thank you, sir.
I'd like to speak one thing on that.
Yes, sir.
Every single pound of flounder caught by a commercial fisherman is accounted for. A trip ticket is filled out. When you take that fish in, he's sold, it's documented. The recreational landings on all fish is a voluntary, you can voluntarily put that information online, or it's a survey done at a boat ramp or a dock. So, say 20 fishermen come in, recreational fishermen come in, load the boat, they leave, they go home. Nobody knows what they caught. Say an hour later, a biologist comes along and a boat pulls up. There's 2 people in the boat. He writes down what those 2 people caught. That's how the data is done with the recreational landings. There is no, just like on the flounders I saw, it said something like it was 400,000 pounds they had. But you got to look at the amount of people that was actually talked to. How many were interviewed? I mean, myself, I've actually been to a boat ramp and watched 20 boats pull up and not a single person be questioned what they caught, what kind of fish. But then again, on the commercial side, every single pound of fish of every kind sold is documented. There is no estimate. There's no guessing. I'd just like to add that.
Thank you. Do you have anything else to add, Mr. Beasley?
I would, concern this gentleman, the quota he's talking about on the flounders, there is a quota, it's called the Atlantic Ocean quota. They can have 7,500 pounds per trip per boat. They can only make so many trips. Each one of those boats has got cameras on it. They got a GPS on it. They know when they leave the dock, get back, and everything that's sold. Everything is on trip ticket. We go back, punch the button. I can tell you everything I've sold for 25 years, or since the trip ticket program has been involved. I've kept a log book on every trip. I can go back yesterday, 10 years ago, tell you the water temperature, what I caught, where I was at, where I should have been, and how much money I got for it. And all of that stuff. Let me tell you about flounder fishing. This man makes it sound like we're the bad guy. Everybody loves seafood, but they hate the commercial fishermen. I cannot understand it. But anyway, let me tell you about flounder fishing last year. You can set your nets at dark. Now, if he wants to go, or anybody else in this room, you set your nets at dark. You got to have them up at daybreak. Well, has anybody ever heard of a thunderstorm, mosquitoes, cottonmouths? And there's a lot of other slimy things out there. But you sit all night long with your nets and got to have them up. If you don't, you're going to get a ticket. Now, this is the way we're treated to be flounder fished. I feel like I'm a piece of something pushed down in the mud and I get stomped on. And I want to be at the top of the food chain. And I want to feed how you going to send your kids to school? And what he's talking about rock fishing, you could have, they used to be 3 rockfish. They upped it to 10 rockfish. Go try to pay your truck payment, house payment, boat insurance, dock rent, everything that goes along with 10 rock. He's talking about overcatch. There ain't no overcatching. There is, the quota is way off. He's off on that. He's might have worked for him and knows some stuff. But the facts that he has is the facts that come from the marine fisheries, the same facts they've got and will not use. And I don't know what they're trying to do, but they're trying to shove us over, and their whole ultimate goal is a total net ban closure for the state of North Carolina. And there's no reason, the numbers are there. They're just trying to prove it to the public, and the public's uninformed, and that's the biggest thing we have is the public is uninformed. And if he wants to eat, and anybody else wants to eat imported seafood, I'll tell you the truth, where it was raised, and what you go to Vietnam and go to Google, and you show me where there's a septic tank in their backyard and where their septic field is, and y'all sitting here worried about where you're going to put this tree, that tree, and build this road. And overseas, they don't even know what a septic tank is, what refrigeration is, what a freezer is, or ice machine. And they're shipping it over here, and somebody over here is eating it. And they won't let me go catch and bring you a fresh local flounder. I'm fighting for freedom for everybody in this room to fish, including myself and every one of you. And the kids that's this tall, I want them to fish. When I'm gone, I want them to go catch a flounder. And it's not just flounder. I fight for tuna. I fight for shrimp. I fight for crabs. And that's the thing. If they pass this, this has killed flounder fishing. You're talking about you're putting everybody out of the flounder industry. How about all the nets I got? Are they going to buy me out like the tobacco farmer? Don't go plant tobacco. We're going to pay you some money. They pay the farmer not to plant property. They pay him to not plant tobacco. Are they going to help us? Not a soul stitch of nothing. We don't get no help for nothing. All we are is that same thing you push down here in this ground. We're hated by everybody, but everybody loves seafood. You go to that Outer Banks, and you'll stand in line to get a plate, and I guarantee you 99% of them's eating seafood. So I'm standing here again for the fight, freedom to fish. And I want y'all to back us, support us, make phone calls, call your congressman, do anything you can. And I appreciate your support. Thank you.
I'd like to say one more thing, just and then that's
Yep, this is it. Come on.
This is the backup, Mr. Beasley.
You winding us down.
I'm winding down. I've gone through they also have the proclamations that come out. These have dates, everything. I've been through every single one. In 2014, from Currituck Bridge across to what they call Sound Point, which would be the north point of Durance Island, that pretty much is the beginning of Albemarle Sound. So from Albemarle Sound north and Currituck Bridge north, from that line to South Carolina, there was 82 days you were allowed to set largemouth nets for flounders out of 365. From Oregon Inlet Bridge to South Carolina, there was 28 days. 28 days because that's restricted to 4 days a week, nighttime soaks only. Say you're out there and you set your net at 7:30, 8 o'clock, you have to be taking them up before daylight the next morning to get them up on time. So your nets are in the water approximately 10 hours. 4 days a week, that's 40 hours out of a possible 168 hours you're allowed to put nets in the water. Overfished, they want to say they're overfished. They're the most underfished now ever. And that's all by proclamation, where those numbers came from. Thank you.
All right, thank you. We have a resolution asking the North Carolina Marine Fisheries to not support the North Carolina Division of Marine Fisheries' use of the supplemental process to implement reductions of southern flounder. That's in our consent agenda. I would like to take that out right now and ask us to vote on it.
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion that we adopt the resolution and send it to wherever it needs to be in a very timely manner so it can be faxed or emailed or however we need to do it by tomorrow.
I'll second that.
Okay, any further discussion? Anybody else have anything to add? Hearing none, all those in favor, aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Glad you got to reacquaint yourself with Currituck, Mr. Beasley.
Thank you. Enjoyed it.
Come back and join us again.
Yeah, don't be a stranger, Perry.
Next item is approval of HVAC maintenance contract for Air Concepts, Inc. Mr. Payment, you know the drill.
Yes, sir. I'd like to excuse myself from this because this is my company, and it would benefit me financially. So,
Make a motion, Mr. Payment be excused.
We have a motion, a second. All those in favor, aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Mr. Scanlon, I guess, after he leaves.
Sure.
Or Mr. McCree.
And maybe it'd be just helpful again to explain to the general public what's just occurred. In North Carolina, a county commissioner may contract to do business with the county if the county does not have a city or town with population exceeding 15,000 people. If the commissioner does not act on the proposed contract, if in a 12-month period the amount of money paid to that county commissioner does not exceed $40,000 for the services, if the county includes the amount of the contract in its annual audit and posts annually with quarterly updates the amount of money paid to that county commissioner, then the county commissioner may conduct business with the county. That's the process we're going through now and why commissioner payment has to be excused. This particular contract would provide a blanket contract for 2 seasonal inspections of HVAC systems at the Southern Outer Banks Water System Water Treatment Plant on the Currituck Outer Banks for the next fiscal year, 2015-2016. The amount paid to Mr. Payment's company may not exceed $800 under this contract. Staff would recommend approval.
Need a motion?
Mr. Chairman, is this not a continuation of previous contract Mr. Payment has had?
This is a different contract, yes.
And I believe Mr. Payment, if I'm not mistaken, in the previous years made $98,000, whereas now as a commissioner he can only make $40,000 if he got everything he could.
I think that's been reported in the
Yes.
paper, yes.
I make a motion to approve.
Second that motion.
Motion for approval, second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor, aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Next item, consideration and action on an ordinance amending Section 10-133 of the Currituck County Code of Ordinances to allow alcoholic beverages at certain county properties pursuant to rules and regulations adopted by the Board of Commissioners. Mr. McCree.
Mr. Chairman, current county code of ordinances prohibits the use, possession, consumption of alcoholic beverages on county parks. This proposed ordinance is a response to, for one thing, a presentation made by the Travel and Tourism Director at your retreat back in January, in which she presented that it might help enhance certain special events at certain county facilities if there was the ability to serve alcohol and consume alcohol at those events, subject to additional rules and regulations adopted by the Board of Commissioners. What you have before you tonight is step one of a two-step process as we set forth in your agenda package. The ordinance amendment proposed tonight would allow for the use and consumption of and possession of alcoholic beverages on 4 county parks. The Knott's Island Ruritan Park, the Currituck County Rural Center, CCRC, the Soundside Park, and Historic Corolla Park. Now we allow alcoholic beverages pursuant to a policy adopted by the county commissioners in 2002 on the historic Corolla Park property, known as a Wellhead Club, has particularly been utilized by wedding parties over those many years. What we would propose to do if the commissioners adopt this resolution is come back to you at an upcoming meeting to provide you with more specific rules and regulations to put this ordinance amendment into effect should it be adopted. That will allow, similar to what has already been allowed at the historic Corolla Park property and the three other park properties that are listed in the ordinance. I'd be glad to answer any questions and remind you that an ordinance at its first reading must be voted on unanimously in the affirmative for it to pass at that meeting, or it must come back for a second reading, at which time it may be passed by a simple majority vote.
All right, questions for Mr. McCree?
Mr. McCree, do you know why, for example, Maple Park wasn't included, or, and I understand we're talking about properties, and why, for example, the cooperative extension facility that was left off?
I think staff recalled from some of the discussion that occurred during your January retreat that cooperative extension facility was not one, and that whole park in Maple was not one that you wanted to consider as being open to the possibility of the use, possession, and consumption of alcoholic beverages. So that's why those were not included, although certainly they may be, depending upon the board's desire.
I'm just trying to understand the criteria that were used for these.
I believe the discussion on exempting those particular properties was due to the fact that that's where you have a concentration of children all the time. You have soccer, you have baseball, you have YMCA, you have the 4-H, the Ag Extension. It's just a heavily concentration of children at those facilities, and just didn't feel like that was consistent with what goes on there. That's the discussion I remember.
I was in travel, so.
We missed you. All right, any other questions of Mr. McCree? Hearing none, then the board would have to make a motion.
Mr. Chairman, in light of the facts that we heard earlier with the Ruitons and the discussions that we have had with the Travel and Tourism Director, this is the first step of at least putting together criteria to allow something like this that may enhance some of the functions that go on within our county. With that being said, I make a motion to approve.
We have a motion for approval.
I'll second that motion, Mr. Idlet, if you would consider including in the rules that we do have it as a permitted event.
Well, that's what the rules and regulations that will come out. Yeah, I guess. I mean,
Yeah, we'll come back with
they
with
will
the
have like an
proposed rules and
alcohol
regulations.
permit.
certainly. Yeah, it's-
Yes, that certainly would be part of it.
Okay.
All this will
Can't
do
just
is
go get a
allow
six-pack
it
and
to
sit
be-
in the park.
That's right. Yeah, we don't, what is being contemplated in terms of rules and regulations in a broad sense is that it would only be allowed, one concept is for events sponsored by Travel and Tourism Department, or you may see a proposal brought back to you that would only be allowed for nonprofit entities who are conducting fundraising events as defined by the ABC law. But that's something that the board is going to have to obviously hash out coming forward.
Any other discussion?
Based upon our earlier work session discussion is, and maybe this is in the details, that a security requirement be in place?
Yes, that would be something certainly that's contemplated being put into the rules and regulations.
Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor, aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no.
Nay.
Nay. All right, motion carries. Next item is Fire and EMS Advisory Board appointments. I believe the consensus of the board was for the representatives from fire departments was Kevin Morgan from Knott's Island, Brooks Hart from Lower Currituck, the Fire EMS Director Chip Melton, the Commissioner Paul Beaumont, and the Citizen Forrest Midget. So we need a motion to approve the slate.
So moved.
Have a motion for approval. Any discussion? We need a second.
I'll second that.
Second. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries. Consent agenda.
So moved.
Have a
Second.
motion for approval. Second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries. Commissioners report. Mr. Beaumont,
Nothing to report.
Mr. Hall,
Nothing at this time.
Mr. Griggs,
Nothing today. Thank you.
Mr. Idlet,
Don't have anything tonight.
Mr. Payment,
No, sir, nothing tonight.
Ms. Gilbert.
No, I have to say something. I would just like to go on record to the public to remand the information in the ordinance on the shooting range. I would like to have that pulled and remanded back to the planning staff to look at the language, to revisit updating and enhancing the language for the shooting range.
In regards to,
Outdoor ranges.
and you're making that as a motion?
Yes.
Okay. So your motion is to send the UDO ordinance back to staff to address, but what issues with the just comprehensive?
Yes, with the decision that was made at our last meeting, I feel that the language needs to be looked at again, so it's, I guess, more defined.
Okay, we have a motion. Do we have a second? Okay, I'll second it. Now we have discussion. Any discussion?
I believe possibly we're already reviewing the UDO and other things for the language. Am I not correct?
I'm making it a public knowledge that we are looking at that.
I think the issue that Commissioner Hall's raising has more to do with doing some cleanup of the ordinance prohibiting the discharge of guns in the code of ordinances, which have some language that's not real clear. But that's kind of separate and apart from the UDO provision.
All right.
The only comment that I would have is to send this, to remand this back to the planning board without any specificity is kind of a nebulous request. I mean, I just think we probably, if it's going to be considered, or we should have some sort of a direction or some sort of idea what to ask the planning department to look at. I mean, what are they supposed to look at?
Well, one issue that was front and center was the noise. And I think there is nothing in there that addresses how noise is addressed. That was what I heard from the audience when we had the public hearing. Me personally, I don't have an opposition to outdoor shooting ranges, but if you're going to have that type of noise, you've got to have some type of criteria. I mean, everybody on this board agreed with that when we heard it last, but there's got to be some kind of criteria, something out there somewhere to address those issues.
Well, I mean, to that end, I think it's somewhat general, but the guidelines that the range meet the NRA rules and guidelines handed out for outdoor ranges speaks to sound abatement, but that notwithstanding, the county already has an ordinance relative to sound. So are you asking for an amendment to the ordinance that we already have, setting part a special request for this activity, or are we talking about just an overall review of the sound ordinance period? Or, I mean, I think we need to let them know what we're looking at.
Specifically just shooting ranges.
So what you're asking for is you want a noise study for each applicant.
For every shooting range applicant, have a noise study
Shooting range
done?
applicant, yes.
Well, I think she's asking for some standards to be incorporated into the, I don't know what she's asking for. Me personally, there should be some standards of noise abatement put into anything that makes above a certain level of noise. I don't know what that answer is.
Well, that's a lot of things.
And I think that would help, I think that would assist in any applicants that come forward going, in the future.
I mean, there's a lot of outdoor activities that make a lot of noise. So, I mean, we could potentially ask for a noise ordinance on a lot of things then.
Well, particularly on the shooting ranges, that's what I would like to see.
I mean, just a general question. I mean, is it legal to or what sort of problems are we getting in if we separate one activity when we're talking about a general noise requirement and separate one and have something different?
What I'm amazed is it's like everybody doesn't know what we're talking about, and every one of the commissioners sitting here has said that's an issue, and everybody acts like they don't know what we're talking about.
I mean, I don't think there's any
No.
problem with it if it's deemed to be a concern, and it obviously seemed to be something that prevented the ability to issue a use permit a week or so ago. Then I think noise certainly is something that can be considered in your land use regulation for this particular use, separate and apart from your noise ordinance.
Well, I think the last time there was an issue, we had a lot of people concerned with a specific special use permit. I do recall, years ago in the Moac area, we also had a motocross, activity site over there that, motocross makes a lot of noise too, surrounding developments. And I think sometimes motocross can be just as loud or louder than gunshots going on all the time when you got a motorcycle going. So, I mean, this was a specific concern. You're right. We had a lot of people concerned about the noise, and we were trying to address the concerns out there. I mean, if you're asking for specific gun ranges, okay, or you asking for all type of activities too, outdoor activities. I mean, like I said, motocross can be one of them too.
Specifically, the shooting ranges for outdoors is what I'd like to have you guys go back and look at the language on.
If what we're asking to do is take a look at the ordinance that is allowing shooting ranges and send it back to planning for further review and study, I don't have a problem with that. If that's what we're looking to do. I mean, let's face it, we were here the other night, and as Mr. O'Neill said, everybody knows what everybody's talking about. We were here half the evening, and we talked about the only place in town to where there could be one and couldn't get a unanimous vote to make it happen. So where else is there going to be one? I mean, so obviously there's issues with the ordinance the way it's written. And if sound is an issue, well, maybe there needs to be something baffling. Or I certainly am not against shooting range. I think Currituck County needs one, and it would be a great thing for our county. Timing and finding a place is everything. And I think as much work as Mr. Moser has put into anything, it would be incumbent upon us to try to help that along, to find a place that would be acceptable to where we could help a venture like that move forward. And so if that's what we're asking to do, I don't have a problem with that. I didn't understand where we were going or what
So
we
we're
were
just
talking
asking
about.
for a study to be done.
For the
review.
For it to go back to the
I
planning
think
board.
you're asking the planning staff to
Planning
review
staff,
the
not
current
planning.
ordinance and make some recommendations to
Okay.
address some of the secondary impacts is
Planning staff, not, but that's where
Not
I
the
got
Not the
planning
planning
board.
board, the planning staff.
planning staff.
Okay, all right.
Okay, well, that clarifies it a little bit better then.
Any further conversation? Okay, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor, aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
And that's all I have.
County manager, I have nothing. County manager's report.
Just remind the board that tomorrow at 8:30, we will start day 2 of the budget.
Oh, joy. And with that, we need a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Have a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Second, all in favor, aye.
Aye.
All opposed?